Hi, I'm Jason Meers and this is NVIDIA GRID on VMware Part 3, Install the GRID software. So in a previous video we had got the software and we'd copied it to the host, and we now had this VIB or VMware installation binary on the server in this directory, and we said we were going to need these two parts, this directory and executable or binary name, to create the full path to that. So just before we install it, we just need to double check that the server has actually recognized that the cards are installed properly. So this is through the host client. I can see the two NVIDIA cards, and what I did here was I just filtered on NVIDIA there, because otherwise this becomes a very long list. So we can see that the card is installed, but notice that pass-through is still disabled. We haven't done traditional PCI pass-through on these cards. We're going to use the GRID software to do that. So that's on the host client, and this is what it looks like on the vCenter client. So again, you can see two GRID cards. Again, because it's got two brains or two GPUs, they appear to be two separate devices on the same card. And again, you can see that this device is not currently available for VMs to use because it's not been configured yet. We're going to do that next as part of installing the software. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to connect to the server over SSH, and we're going to use a tool called PuTTY. Now PuTTY uses SSH, so it's going to need the SSH service either starting temporarily or permanently on the host. So you need to do that bit first. If you're not familiar with how to do that, I do have another video called Host Client, Host Manage, part of the vSphere 7 Home Lab series. If you're unsure how to do that, go back to that video first and then come back here once SSH is enabled, because then we can connect to the host using PuTTY. So we need to put in, first thing we need to do is add an IP address for the server, and then a port, which is port 22. That is pretty much always going to be enabled by default or set by default as soon as you click the SSH button, but just check it anyway. One of the things you might want to do is click on the Appearance tab to change the size of the font, just in case you'd like the font any bigger or change the font. If you do change the appearance, just click back here on the Session button to get back to this screen, where you can optionally save this if you think you might need to connect to this again and save some time. And as soon as these settings are right and you've saved it if you want to, we then click on the Open button to connect to the host. And similar again, the fingerprint for the SSH certificate you may be prompted for just before we connect, just for it to make sure that you are going to decide to trust this host if you've not seen it before. So once we've connected, we get to this SSH shell or secure shell, and it's from here that we're actually going to do the installation. So first thing I'm going to do is talk you through this command line stuff here, where we are going to change directory into a particular directory. This is where this comes in, where we make a note of the path that we need to follow and the binary inside that we need to execute. So the first thing I'm going to do, just to prove a point or just to show you how this works, is I'm going to change directory into vmfs /volumes /ESXi 16 HDD 750 gig /updates. So that's the way that I change into that directory. What that actually means is change directory, and this first part is the mount point. That's the folder on the host that all the data stores are mounted into. The next thing is the name of the data store itself, which is the one I've decided to put the file on. It's a 750 gig hard drive on ESXi server 16, and we created that folder called updates to put those updates in. So that's just a quick explanation of how that path is built. If you've been working in IT for a while, you're probably familiar with this stuff already. I just thought I'd color code it just to make it a little bit simpler. So that updates is the folder we created. So let's just do that again, because for new users this could be quite daunting. That command again, cd mount point data store folder. Now just something here, because that's quite a long line to type. Let's say I type cd space /VM and I still need to type all the rest of this. There's something called command completion, which means that if I press tab, if there are no other folders that begin with VM and I press tab, it will automatically type the rest of that for me. And if I type /VO and there's no other folders that begin with VO, I can press tab and it will continue to press to complete the rest of that. So you can use command completion to fill out this line, and actually I'd recommend doing it, especially when we get to a complicated thing like this. It may be that when we get here we just type N, capital V, and when we press tab it will type all of that in, making sure that we don't make any mistakes. So again, if you've not heard of that before, it's called command completion, and it will save you a lot of time when we come to do this install. So here we are at the secure shell, and we're going to do the install now. Remember again, I know I keep going over this, but we need to take into account the folder or the directory and the name of the binary. And what we're going to type, this first line, ESXi software vib install. So the first part of this is that it's the vSphere ESX command line interface. We're going to use it to install software of the type vib. That's what that line means. ESXi software vib install. So that's the first part of the command, but we're also going to have to tell it where the vib is, and we do that with -v to tell it the vib location. And the first part of this is the directory that it's in, that part there, and then the next part of that is the file name. So this is one continuous line. I've just broke it out here. So that's the command to install, that's the folder, and this is the binary part. If I go to the next slide, show you again, that probably makes it a little bit simpler. There's three parts of that command: the location from a directory point of view, and then the binary itself. And what I will do is to show you again, this is one continuous line, but I can't fit it on screen. So that's what the whole line looks like. That should have a .vib on the end. And again, use tab completion for this. You'll see actually in the screenshot I do have the vib on the end there. And when you install that, hopefully it will come back with an installation result. So we type that line in with .vib on the end and then press enter, and hopefully it will say installation result, operation finished successfully. Do we need to reboot? That's false, it doesn't need a reboot. There's a vib that we installed, the NVIDIA one. None were removed and none were skipped. So at this point we've successfully installed that driver for the NVIDIA grid card for vSphere 6.5. So now that it's installed, the next thing to do is run this nvidia-smi command. So this command, you run it once and there's no updates. So what I tend to do is type nvidia-smi, press enter, and if I need it again, I press the up arrow on my keyboard to do another nvidia-smi enter, and another one. So I just keep running the same command just to look at the status of this, because it doesn't automatically update. So tip for you there is press the up arrow on your keyboard and it will automatically type the last command you did, and you just have to press enter to run it again. So you can continually run this command by just pressing up arrow enter, because this doesn't change dynamically. So the way that this nvidia-smi command works is you'll see the bulk of the detail is in that green box at the top and that represents the whole card. You'll then see sections for each of the brains or each of the GPUs. So GPU 0 is in that orange box, GPU 1's information is in the yellow box, and you'll see the 0 and the 1 here denoting which of the GPUs or brains we're referring to, and then here you can see anything running on the card and which GPU or brain it is that's actually carrying that out. This is actually doing nothing at the minute. It's using 7 meg of RAM out of the 4095 meg it's got, so 4 gigs worth of RAM, only 7 meg in use, so it's just sat there idle. You can see here from the utilization it's actually doing nothing. So that's the main screen for nvidia-smi. I'm just going to clear that off so I can show you some more. And what you'll notice here again, use this nvidia-smi command again just to keep refreshing it, because otherwise you'll be looking at old information. This part here talks about the current power usage and the current power cap. So these machines this brain or this GPU is using 29 watts out of a maximum of 117, and GPU or brain number 1 is using 28 watts out of a maximum 117. So that's the usage and the cap for each of the two GPUs. The next thing then is the memory use. So in this screenshot I'm using 18 meg of 4095, and this one again using 18 meg of 4095. and the processor utilization is 0 because it's doing nothing, and everything else is just default. So we're not really doing a great deal here, but this is how you read power usage, memory usage, and utilization down, and the cards across. Now the one that's really important here, and I can't stress this enough, this is the one that you really need to be careful with, and this is the one that we need to keep running that command for, because this shows the temperature of the card. Now if you don't keep running the command, you're going to be looking at information which is old, and these temperatures can jump up quite quickly. So this card is currently sat at 41 degrees and 37 degrees, the two different branes on the same card. The thing to worry about here is that when you look at the fan speed, it says NA, not applicable, and that's because these cards don't have any fans. That is why they get so hot. They expect to be in a server with a very high throughput of air, so they expect the server to be blowing air through the card, so passively cooled rather than actively cooled with a fan on them. And what you'll find is that if these cards reach 91 degrees, they'll do a thermal shutdown, and they'll shut down and stop working, and until you cool them down and restart the server, the card won't work again. So just to be careful here that this you keep on top of these temperatures. I think you need to start getting worried anything over about 80 degrees, and at 91 you risk the card shutting down or even breaking the card. So I'll just show you that these fans here not applicable, because when we look at the card, it's just the metal heatsink. There's no active cooling on this card whatsoever. That's why you need to be careful with it. So again, nvidia-smi, just keep running this command to keep track of the temperature, and that's the bit you need to worry about. Anything over about 80 degrees I would be concerned with. At 91 it's going to shut down. Now if for any reason you can't run this nvidia-smi command, the most likely cause is this. It's an error message that comes back saying it cannot find the GPU because it's insufficiently powered. So common problem with these, because most desktops and tower servers, unless they're dedicated server boxes, won't have a power supply big enough to cope with them, or they won't have the correct connectors to plug them in. So if I look at this in my server, you can see a 6-pin connector here, quite common in desktop PCs and workstations, but there's also an 8-pin connector here, which is less common and not often found in workstations, and you have to have this 8-pin connector plugged in. Ideally you'd have both, but the card will not work without at least the 8-pin connector plugged in. So there's a 6-pin connector there and an 8-pin connector there. If you haven't got an 8-pin connector, what you can buy is an adapter like this, where an additional 6-pin connector goes in there and is turned into an 8-pin connector here. The extra pins are actually just ground pins, but they are required because there's so much current going through the card. So you can pick up these for a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars. But as I say, you just need to make sure that at least the 8-pin is connected, preferably both, and you do need quite a beefy power supply. I would suggest that it has to be at least 500 watts, maybe 600 or 800 watts in order to power this card safely, and you also need a hell of a lot of cooling to make sure that this card is kept cooled down. So you either need to be putting air through the card, or you need to be having blowers inside trying to cool it down, but essentially you need to be blowing through air through this card at an incredible rate to keep it cool. So that was part 3, how to install the grid software. So we'll move on to other videos after this, but thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found that useful.